And these letters, they contain a lot of teachings on occult philosophy and also on the physical science. So to that extent, they are very important. Sinnett had sent a long list of questions to Mahatma KH, and he sent it in two parts. In part 1, there were 3 questions, and in part 2, there were 29 questions. So this letter 93A, it contains all the questions from Sinnett and answers from Mahatma KH to the 3 questions of part 1. And then in letter 93B, the answers by Mahatma KH to all the 29 questions of part 2 are given. But for the sake of convenience, it is better to take one question followed by its answer. Otherwise, we will miss out what the questions were. So that is what I'm going to do. And we'll begin from this, the first 3 questions which were in part 1. So I'll share my slides with you. The slides contain the letter which is given, which is printed in the book. But we are not going to read the letter. We will go through the explanation and the discussion of it. Okay. Yes, so these are the letters, and these are the first 3 questions which Sinnett had written to Mahatma KH. He asked that there is a very interesting allusion in your last letter. When speaking of Hume, you speak of certain characteristics he brought back with him from his last incarnation. And have you the power of looking back to the former lives of persons now living and identifying them? In that case, would it be improper personal curiosity to ask for any particulars of my own? So Mahatma Ji answered that all of us, we bring back some characteristics from our previous incarnation. It is unavoidable. What happens is, as we have studied in Theosophy, that upon physical death, after all the lower vehicles, they are dissipated, the physical body, astral body, then the causal body, it stores every quality in germ form or in seed form. And this is carried over to the next incarnation. So this causal body, it is the storehouse of evil as well as good. And the good, it is actually worked out into the texture or the fabric of our causal body, and it aids the growth of the causal body. And the evil, they remain as germ. They will sprout perhaps when the next incarnation is taken. So then he asks about the power of looking back into the former lives. So Mahatma Ji says, unfortunately, some of us have this power. I, for one, do not like to exercise it. Why? Because to the Western mind, it will seem like an infringement upon their privacy. Normally, anybody will be very particular about their privacy. For example, you cannot read anybody's thoughts. If you know that a person can read your thoughts, how insecure you will be. You have no privacy, right? Now, some adepts have this ability that they can look into the former lives of people. So Mahatma Ji is saying that yes, when you achieve a certain spiritual evolution, you can do that. So some of the adepts have that ability, but he does not like to exercise it. And secondly, it may also lead to forming an opinion or a bias about someone based on his previous life. If a person is reading someone's former life, then based on what he did in the former life, that person will create an impression about the current person that he is. And although in the current incarnation, the person may have changed for good, but still there will be a bias in the mind of the person who is looking into his former life. So it is not a good idea, Mahatma Ji says. And then as to the third question which Sinnett asked about being improper in wanting to know his own previous life. So Mahatma Ji mentioned that there is nothing as improper in such a curiosity. Everyone likes to know. Man is curious by nature. And this Delphian oracle, she has said, man, know thyself. We know this oracle of Delphi. She was the high priestess of the temple of Apollo at Delphi. And she would tell these, she would prophesy to the people who would come to her for advice. She was supposed to be in communication with the sun god, Apollo. Okay, so she mentioned that man know thyself. So, what is the harm in having this curiosity? Only would it not be still more proper to study our own present personality before attempting to learn anything of its creator, predecessor, and fashioner, the man that was? So, this is the more important thing, that the qualities and the karma of man in his previous life, they determine his next life, right? So, it is the fashioner. It has fashioned your current life, because the good and the evil that are present in him at the time of his physical death, we know that they are carried forward to his next incarnation. So, this previous life, it is the fashioner of the next personality in which he incarnates. But what is done in the past, it cannot be undone. So, as you are today, you will remain today, but you can change now for the better. So, rather than indulging in curiosity to learn about previous life, it is still more important to observe our present self, to improve upon our present self by ridding it of any vices or bad habits that may be, and then cultivating good habits and virtues and progressing on the path of spirituality. So, by doing this in our present life, we will be creating a better future in the next life, because this will be carried forward to the next life. So, concentrate on the present life. Don't indulge in the curiosities of knowing about your past life. This is what Mahatmaji tells Sinet. So, this was the part one of that list of questions. And then there is the part two, in which there are 29 questions. So, of that part two, we will take this one, the first one. Just okay. So, the first question is there any way of accounting for what seems the curious rush of human progress within the last 2000 years, as compared with the relatively stagnant condition of the fourth round people up to the beginning of modern progress? Okay. Last 2000 years, that means beginning maybe from the first century AD. Now we are in the 21st century. So, in these 2000 years, Sinet thinks that there is a great human progress, great rush of human progress which is happening. But prior to that, was the condition of mankind of this fourth round? Was it very stagnant? We are presently the fifth root race of this fourth globe and the fourth round. So Mahatmaji has given his answer. He says that this is the latter end of a very important cycle. Each round, each ring. So each ring is each race. Now, actually, see, there is no standardization of vocabulary. So there might be confusion what is round and what is ring. But in reading these letters, based on the context, I found that round means one globe period. Globe period means all the 7 root races which happen on one globe. Now, currently on our Earth, which is the globe D, 7 root races have to happen. 4 have already been, they have already passed, and now we are in the 5th root race. So that is being referred as round. Okay, keep that in mind. Otherwise, there will be a lot of confusion in this. And ring is alluding to the root race. Each root race is a ring. Okay. Normally, we take round as when the life wave passes through all 7 globes of the septenary Earth. That we consider as a round. But I think in these letters, round means just one globe. And life wave is moving through all the 7 races on each globe. Okay. So he says that each round, each ring, and every race has its great and smaller cycles on every planet that mankind passes through. Now, our fourth round humanity, it is one great cycle. And so also the races and sub-races have their own cycles. So there are actually cycles within cycles. And this curious rush of human progress, it is due to the double effect of the larger cycle, beginning its downward course. And this the larger cycle which is beginning its downward course, that is the root race, and the smaller cycle which is the sub race, the European sub race, that is running to its apex. So the cycle within cycle, the cycle of the subrace within the root race, they are in opposition. I request all participants to keep their mics on mute.
I muted already.
Okay, thank you. Now, Mahatma Ji tells Senate, you belong to the fifth race, yet you, meaning Senate, are only a Western sub-race. What you think is civilization is only confined to the regions of the Western sub-race, that is to Europe and its offshoots in America. Though deceptively it seems that it also includes China and Japan, but that is not the case. There is no such rush of human progress there. There is no evolutionary progress happening. We tend to think that China and Japan are very advanced civilizations. But as we read this letter, we will come to know what is the reality. And he says that a student of occultism should not speak of the stagnant conditions of the fourth round people. We are the fourth round people, and students who are studying occultism, they must not think that they were in a stagnant condition, because modern history does not know anything about the progress of any other nation except the Western nations. And great civilizations and great nations, they have risen and fallen in the past, but there is no record of them in modern history. So how can we say that it was a stagnant condition? This is what Mahatmaji is trying to tell Senate. He asks, what do you know of America, for instance? So before America was invaded by Spain, nothing is known about that concretely. In fact, in 1519, the Spanish conqueror Cortes, he led an expedition to invade Mexico. And less than 2 centuries prior to that, less than 200 years before Cortes invaded America, there was a great rush towards progress among the subraces which inhabited the American land, like the subraces of Peru and Mexico. The same is happening now in Europe and USA. The American subrace, we know many of them, many of us would have studied in our school days. They were the Aztecs, the Mayan. The Mayan culture was very advanced. The ruins are still there. And the Incas. And there would have been many more subraces. They had reached great heights in progress and advancement. And they ended in near total annihilation. Why? Through the causes which were generated by themselves. Mahatmaji tells Senate, so will yours at the end of this cycle. The European subrace, which is currently at the peak, it will also end in the same way. Its decline will happen in time to come. And this is because the law of cyclic progression. So actually speaking, these stagnant conditions are only those into which every race and subrace, it falls during its transition period. Okay, during the decline period. So it appears as a stagnant period. And when the previous race or subrace is declining, then a new race or a subrace, it is arising. Okay, so it appears like a period of no progress is happening. One is still new, it is still arising, and the other is declining. And there is a considerable overlap between these two periods. So there is no clear-cut demarcation of time, okay, due to that overlap. And this happens following the law of development, growth, maturity, and decline. This is the cycle followed by every race and subrace. It will develop, it will grow, it will increase in its glory, fame, progress, it will reach maturity, and then it will decline. And as it is declining, there will be a transition and a new race or subrace will start arising. Now, our modern history, it is referred as universal history. And this modern history, Mahatma Ji says that it is acquainted only with the declining phase of the races, but it remains superbly ignorant of the conditions even in India some 10 centuries back. It knows nothing about the glory and the fame of India 10 centuries back. And your subraces, meaning the European subraces, they are now running towards the apex of their respective cycles. They are at their height of progress. And what appears to them as stagnation, meaning what is appearing to Senate or to all those Western people of the British society, it is appearing that the rest of the world they call third world countries or developing countries. So to them, it appeared as stagnation. It is only the periods of decline of a few other subraces. That stagnation is nothing but the decline of a few other subraces. And most of these declining subraces, they belong to the previous root race, the Atlantean. So they are still present today. They are declining, and that is appearing as stagnation. This universal eye of modern history, it knows nothing beyond hardly a few dozens of previous centuries. And beyond that, everything is darkness for it. Everything is nothing but a hypothesis. So then, how can Sinnett speak about stagnation? That was Mahatmaji's question. Then Sinnett asked the next question, or has there been at any former period during the habitation of the earth by fourth round men civilizations as great as our own in regard to intellectual development that have utterly passed away? Meaning, were there any civilizations equal or higher in intellectual development than the European subraces, though there is no record or knowledge about them? And that he's asking, that these civilizations, were they existing on earth in any former period? So Mahatmaji says, no doubt there was. Egyptians and Aryans, their records and especially our zodiacal tables furnish us with every proof of it besides our inner knowledge. So there were such great former civilizations. Their records were present with Egyptian and Aryan records and in the zodiacal tables, and also the inner knowledge of the adepts. Zodiacal tables, we know what are they? They are charts basically which show the position of planets, stars, nakshatra. They mark the major events on what event is going to take place on what date and time. Okay, so they are like a direct proof. And what besides that zodiacal tables, there was also the proof of the inner knowledge. Now, what is inner knowledge? It is this innate and direct knowledge which is present within every man, because man has a septenary constitution. It is inherent in the higher self, and it is not dependent on the external study or proof, that knowledge. So this inner knowledge, what Mahatma Ji is mentioning, it is available or it is accessible to the spiritually evolved men, those who are the perfected men, the high adepts, and who are centered. They are consciously centered in the buddhi manas, in the higher manas. To them, that inner knowledge or the intuitive knowledge, it is available. So he says that our inner knowledge is the proof that such uh, great civilizations and races, they actually existed. Then he says that civilization is an inheritance. It is a patrimony that passes from race to race along the ascending and descending paths of cycles. So, what is basically a civilization? It is characterized by the social development, by the art, and by the cultural richness of those people, by what scientific and technological advancements they achieve. So that is what together comprises a civilization. And all this becomes a heritage. It is passed on. It becomes a heritage of the next subrace, which will gradually make its appearance, and it overlaps the decline of the previous race. So that is a heritage of the civilization. Now, Bharmaji compares the new sub-race to a kid, to a child who does not value the advice of their elders. Children, how they are, if you tell them this is very important, keep it carefully, but to them it may not have any value. So, what the kid does, it mocks and ridicules the records of the past, leaving this wealth of inheritance from the previous sub-races unrecognized and untouched. And thus, during your transition period, that is the Middle Ages, Europe rejected the testimony of antiquity. So Europe has been compared to that kid who did not value the inheritance of the previous subraces. This transition period, it was when the European subraces began to appear and the previous subraces were declining. Okay, so this happened in the medieval period, which is approximately between 500 AD to 1400 AD. It is also called the Dark Ages or the Middle Ages. That was the transition period. And at that time, Europeans, they rejected as lies the writings of the great Greek philosophers and writers like Herodotus. He was a great historian, but they rejected that his writings are all lies. And he wrote actually about this Greek and Persian wars. It was only much later that this truth of his writing it was acknowledged, and then it was considered history. So earlier they rejected it as lies, and then they considered it history. Instead of neglecting, you now accumulate and add your wealth. It is only now that the European subrace they started taking cognizance of the great wealth, of the rich cultural history, and is itself on the ascending curve of growth. So, like every other race, Europe also has had its ups and downs. It was not always at the peak of its growth. It had its ups and downs, periods of honor. Excuse me. Uh, Sorry. So, like every other race, Europe too has had its ups and downs, its periods of honor and dishonor, even the dark midnight. And now they are approaching the brilliant noon. Brilliant noon meaning the period of its most intellectual advancement. In the Middle Ages, it was really plunged into a lot of misery and superstition, and the conditions were very bad. So that was the dark midnight. And now they have embarked on this period of intellectual advancement, which is the allegory is given as brilliant noon. This European subrace, it is the latest subrace of the Aryan root race. Therefore, it is the youngest at present. And it is compared to Cinderella or Cendrillon. This is a fairy tale character. Most of you would be familiar with the story of Cinderella and her stepmother and stepsisters. So, this European subrace is compared to Cinderella. And she was not cared by her stepsisters and stepmother. And now, when so many of your sisters, meaning the other subraces, European subraces, Cinderella, and her stepsisters, the other subraces, they have died. The previous subraces have died. And the others are still dying. The other subraces, they are still dying, while the few of the old survivors, who are the surviving races? It includes this Aryan Asiatic race, which was the first subrace of the fifth root race, the Aryan race. So there are still some survivors. Now they are in their second infancy and they wait for their Messiah, the sixth race. Messiah is the savior. So the sixth race who will act as a savior to resurrect to a new life and start anew with the coming strong along the path of a new cycle. So the survivors of the old subrace, they will rise again along with the sixth subrace. That will be the new cycle. We must have, many of you must have read in the theosophical literature that the beginnings of the new root race, the sixth root race, it will arise from the sixth sub-race of the Aryan race. And the sixth sub-race has already started making its appearance. Okay, so again, see there is an overlap between the fifth sub-race and the sixth sub-race. While all of the previous sub-races, they are not totally extinct. They are still there and they are in there. They are waiting to be resurrected into this new life, into the new cycle. So now that the Western Cendrillon, meaning the European subrace, it has suddenly developed into a proud, wealthy princess. So this is the European subrace, which is now known throughout the world for its great intellectual advancement. So she's just like Cinderella, who finally became the wealthy princess. Okay, so rise and intellectual advancement of European subrace. So that subrace of the Indian continent, which is the Asiatic Aryan subrace. It is nearly 1 million years old, as it was the first subrace, and it is the older sister of the European subrace. Now, this Indian subrace, it is the only one who never treated the European subrace unkindly, meaning it never attacked or waged war upon the Europeans, though it may have ignored or remained indifferent to the Europeans, which means that whatever was the spiritual advancement, the great knowledge of the Indian subrace, it was not shared with the European subrace. Okay. And now what is the situation? Now the European subrace had colonized India and was applying to her the lex talionis with vengeance. That lex talionis means the law of retaliation, an eye for an eye, right? So Mahatma Ji is telling, this, my good friend and brother, is not far-fetched allegory, but history. This is actually what happened in the cycles of races and subraces. Then Sinnett asks the third question. Even the fifth race, that means our own race, of the fourth round began in Asia 1 million years ago. What was it about for the 998,000 years preceding the last 2000? During that period, have greater civilizations than our own risen and decayed? And Mahatma Ji says, yes. It means that yes, greater civilizations than our own have risen and decayed. The fifth race, that is our race, it began in Asia 1 million years ago. And Mahatma Ji is actually chiding Sinnett. He's saying that Sinnett demonstrates quite a Christian spirit because he refuses to believe that any good could ever have come out from anywhere before and save Nazareth. That means before the time of Jesus Christ. You see, even our timeline, this English calendar that is followed, it is the dates are divided into before Christ and after Christ, right? So they think that this after Christ period, AD, from the first century onwards, that is the period of progression. And before that, no good could ever have arisen from anywhere. And that is why Sinnett asked such kind of a question, that before these 2000 years, what were there any such great races? So Mahatma Ji mentioned that in the Eocene age. Now, Eocene age, okay, I will like to share with you the geological time scale. In this, you can see in this chart, at the bottom of the chart, this is the older period. And as you go to the top of the chart, it is the more recent period. So the time is divided into aeons and eras and epochs. Okay. And currently we are in this Eocene period. Okay. Eocene epoch. Prior to that, in this Mesozoic era, you can see that was the Triassic or the Jurassic and the Cretaceous period when there were the dinosaurs on the earth. And now the dinosaurs are all extinct. We have moved into the next period. And then during this Eocene period, that is what Mahatma Ji is referring, which began 56 million years ago and it lasted up to 34 million years ago. So the period between this, it is called the Eocene period. Okay, of course, now we are at this point here, present times, after this Holocene. Okay, so what he mentions that is the last point. In the Eocene age, which as per we have seen in our geological timescale began 56 million years ago and it lasted up to 34 million years ago. So even in the first part, the great cycle of the fourth race men, the Atlanteans, had already reached its highest point. In the first part of that Eocene age, the Atlanteans had already reached the apex of their advancement. And the great continent, that is the great Atlantean continent, which Mahatma Ji calls the father of nearly all the present continents. It was so huge. It showed the first symptoms of sinking. And this process of sinking continued till 11,446 years ago. Now, that is quite recently as compared to 56 million years ago, the Eocene period. Okay, the last of that Atlantean continent, it sank only, This process of sinking continued till about 11,446 years ago. So that is when the last Atlantean continent island, which was called Poseidonis, it sank into the ocean. Now, prior to the Atlanteans, there existed and flourished the third root race. Atlantean root race is the fourth one. And prior to that were the Lemurians, which was the third root race. And they were on a totally distinct continent from the Atlantean continent. And remnants of this third race, they are the Aborigine tribes of Australia. They are distinguishable structurally by having a somewhat flat head. So their bone structure is slightly different. You can see that they have a somewhat flat head. Lemurians and Atlantic both were highly advanced and flourishing civilizations. And they had very highly evolved men. And Mahatma Ji actually is using the term gods for them. Okay, see that the level of knowledge they had, the level of occult science and technology which they knew, so they are termed as gods. Yet, both of them, they were completely sunk and drowned. Both those continents on which they inhabited, the Lemurians and the Atlanteans, those continents were completely sunk and drowned. Lemuria sank about 700,000 years prior to the sinking of the great Atlantean continent. The Atlantean continent also it sank over a very long period of time, but just as it was beginning to sink, from the beginning of the sinking of the Atlantean, 700,000 years prior to that, Lemuria had already sunk. So that was the time gap between those two great races. And also, Mahatmaji added that it is totally incorrect that the population of India and Egypt comes from the remainder or the refuse of the Atlantean race. It is not so. They are not the descendants of the Atlantean race. No doubt the modern day geologists, they are very learned. They have explored and fathomed the depths of continents to find the Eocene age, the strata of the continents in the ocean bed, and they have found its secrets. But they should also accept the possibility that deep in the unfathomed ocean beds, the ocean beds which have not been yet explored, much more older continents may be hidden. Those stratums of the ocean, they have never geologically been explored. This is a hint that there may be many more continents older than Lemuria, which Mahatma Ji is telling Sinet. And someday, when their history will become known, when we will be able to discover those continents, then it will upset all the present theories. And these present theories of modern science, they are based on visionary conjecture. Visionary conjecture is just a hypothesis or a theory, whereas Mahatma Ji says that what is more reliable? Inductive generalization. Inductive generalization, it means it is a statistical method. What it means is that when there is a population, you take a sample from that and you observe the sample, and based on that, you draw your conclusions for the entire population that is observed. So that is induction method, inductive generalization. And that is not applied by geology. So they have got their findings quite incorrect or faulty. Now, just like Lemuria and Atlantis are present day continents too, they have already been several times submerged and re emerged. So, this keeps happening. Land masses keep going underwater and then they keep re emerging. It has happened to our continents too. Some of you might have read about the present day Sahara Desert in Africa. So, there have remains of ships and something like fossils have been found there from the sea. So it seems that that Sahara region was also underwater at one point in time. Okay, so what Mahatma Ji is saying here, that on every re-emergence, these continents, they bear a new group of mankind and civilization. So when one race is going down, that continent generally it will be destroyed, it will go underwater. When it re-emerges, it will be bearing the next race or sub-race, a new group of mankind and civilization. And in every round, now round, remember we said it will be the globe period, 7 root races. So in every round, such periodical cataclysms, they keep occurring periodically. This is in keeping with that law. And when the next great geological upheaval will occur, then our present continents will also go down into the ocean, and the previously submerged lands. The previously submerged lands are Lemuria and Atlantis. So they will come up again. So this is the cyclic law, it will happen. He tells us that we should stretch our imagination and think what the future geologist of the sixth and seventh races will find. We are in our fifth root race. We still have the 2 more sub-races to come, sixth sub-race and seventh sub-race. After that will come the sixth sub-race. And after the sixth sub-race, then will come the seventh sub-race. So just imagine that the geologists of those races, okay? So it is just humor, but imagine what will they find when they dig deep into the layers of earth and when they unravel what was once upon a time Ceylon and Shimla. What can you think what would have happened to the civilization at present when it will be found in the sixth and seventh root race? What happens is that in the intervening glacial periods, almost entire continents are covered by glaciers, that is solid sheets of ice. Okay, and these glaciers they flow and move, and they can crush to dust almost all the objects, all the civilization, all advancement, anything that has been built. Everything is pulverized and crushed to dust. And this, which all everything that has been created by the civilized humanity, which has inhabited on these continents now, it will be lost. So, as per we know that as per geology, our the last glacial period on this earth, it happened about 100,000 years ago, and it lasted for nearly 75,000 years. Okay, so the future geologists of sixth and seventh race, they will not find any artifacts which will indicate an advanced civilization. Rather, they may find only very crude, broken artifacts, like which are now found among the savage and uncivilized tribes. And it is quite possible that they may conclude that the humanity of our present times, it was very primitive. It was living on trees and eating animals, like the Vedas. Vedas are the indigenous tribe of Sri Lanka. So it is quite possible that the geologists of the sixth and seventh root race might think that we at present who are living now, we were also very primitive, animal-like, because those glacial flows, the glacial ice sheets, they would have pulverized the entire civilization. And this would be really ironic because Sinnett considers the European civilization to be quite advanced. Okay, and imagine that the future geologist thinking that it was very primitive. So it's quite a irony, but there is every possibility that they will conclude that the European civilization of 1800s was composed of man-like animals. So Mahatma Ji is trying to tell him what you're calling stagnation of the previous great nations and civilizations, even yours, which you are considering so advanced, may at some point in future be considered as very primitive. Now, this is a fact that the Greek, Roman, and even the Egyptian civilizations of our race now, they are nothing compared to the civilizations of the third root race, the Lemurian. We consider that Egyptian was a very advanced civilization. The pharaohs, they were the divine kings, and also the Rome was a mighty empire. The Greeks also had a very highly advanced civilization, but that is nothing as compared to the civilizations of the third root race, the Lemurian race. And the fourth root race, that is Atlantean race, it too had its crest period, the apex or the highly advanced period. That was the duration of its highest civilization. And the second root race, about that, Mahatma Ji says, they cannot be called civilized. The second root race, it didn't have any civilization as such, But neither were they savages, meaning they were not violent or uncontrolled, but also they didn't have any organized society or a civilization. Okay. Then, in one of Mahatma KH's previous letters to Senate about races, the highly advanced civilization of third and fourth races, they were not mentioned, but only their remaining population, which has now fallen into decline, that was described. So that is the reason Mahatma Ji is urging Senate, do not regard an unavoidable incomplete description as inconsistency. Because in some previous letter, Mahatma Ji has only written about the declining subraces of the Lemurian and Atlantean. And so Senate somehow has got this idea that there was a stagnation period and there was no advances in the former time periods. But now Mahatma Ji is telling that there were mighty civilizations, highly advanced. So Senate should not consider this as an inconsistency. Senate and Hume, many times they had these doubts that Mahatma Ji is being inconsistent, making up the stories of these root races and the doctrine of races and subraces. So to avoid that confusion. Okay. So now, since Sinnett had asked a direct question about what was the fifth race like for 998,000 years preceding the immediate 2000 years. Okay, so that was his question. And whether any greater civilization than our own had risen and decayed. Therefore, Mahatmaji is answering his direct question and saying that Greek and Romans were only small sub races. Okay. He has just mentioned Greek and Romans were small sub-races. And in the further part of the letter, we will come to know that they are not sub-races of the Aryan root race. They were sub-races of the previous one, the Atlantean root races. That will become clear in the letter further. Okay. So this Greek and Romans, they were small sub-races. And the Egyptian sub-race, it came from the Caucasian subrace, which was considered this Caucasian subrace, it was considered from where the original white people of Europe came. It actually refers to the Caucasus Mountains, which are in the southern part of Russia. Okay, they are very close, just to the north of the Georgian border. So between Georgia and Russia, the Caucasus Mountains are there, and the people or the tribes originating from there, they were the white European people called the Caucasian subrace. That the Caucasian mountain, it connects if you see the world map, it connects the Black Sea to the Caspian Sea. It is a thin stretch of land between the two seas, Caspian Sea and Black Sea. So from that region, this Caucasian subrace is supposed to have come, and the Egyptian subrace came from the same Caucasian subrace. Now, can anyone imagine that Egyptians are also evolved from the same subrace as the European subrace? These Egyptians, they evolved as a distinct subrace, which has now disappeared entirely. And what is their remnant population? They are called the Copts. These Copts are the intermixed race. They intermixed with other sub-races. So Egyptian race has totally disappeared. And Copts are basically the Christian ethno-religious group which are inhabiting the North African region. Okay, so that was about the Egyptian sub-race. Now both the Egyptian and the Indian civilizations, they advanced to their apex, including in terms of learning and in terms of knowledge. But both these great civilizations, they met with decline and they went down. Okay, India is actually one of the first and most powerful offshoots of the fifth root race, that is the Aryan race. India was this Indian civilization, in fact, the entire Indian subcontinent. It was the first offshoot of the fifth root race, the most powerful. It comprises of many subraces, and while the Egyptian subraces they have disappeared now, they are extinct. The Indian subraces are still present, and they are struggling to rise up once again and regain their lost glory. I think by looking at the world conditions today, many of you will agree with this statement of Mahatma Ji. Now, modern history, it does not have the complete picture of past civilizations. We know that. Egypt was already past its epics and it was on way to decline some 1200 years back. And modern history knows nothing about India prior to past 5000 years. Even in our school history, many of us would have learned about this Indus Valley civilization, which was 5,000 years ago, Mohenjo-daro, Harappa. Right? Then also the history of the Chaldees is not known. Chaldees, they are confused with Assyrians, sometimes called Akkadians, and at other times called Turanians. So these are all subraces, most of them from the previous fourth root race, Atlantean. So Mahatma Ji shows that modern history has not got its facts correct. It is entirely at sea. That is, it is changing its fact every now and then. So it is entirely at sea. Now, during the 19th century, there was this journal of science. It was of great importance and it was held in high esteem by the intellectual class, especially the Western intellectual class, considering that it published things of great knowledge, scientific knowledge. But that journal, it refused to acknowledge the higher knowledge, such as about the races and sub-races, which was given by the Mahatmas or by the brothers, as they were called. And we've read about this person in previous lectures, M.A. Oxon. It was the pen name of Stanton Moses. This Stanton Moses, same one who was the spiritualist and member of TS, and he claimed that the imperator was his spirit guide. So it is the same person. He was the reviewer of this journal, and he wanted the Mahatmas to prove their high knowledge by telling about some hidden planet or some mineral which is not yet discovered by science. So if they could tell some such things, then the journal will recognize that yes, they have high knowledge. Now, Mahatma Ji says that even if they were to reveal the presence of a new planet in space, even if they tell them, okay, if you point your telescope here, you will find a new planet, or you will find a new mineral in the depths of the earth that was previously not known to science. Still, in spite of that, this journal of science will discount all this knowledge. It will discount them for one reason or the other. It could even be the ridiculous reason of plagiarism. Why? Plagiarism is something which is already written and you just copy it. So Mahatma Ji says that every planet and every mineral that exists in space or inside the earth, it may not be known to modern science, but it is known and already recorded in the books of the adepts thousands of years ago. What a great knowledge! What a wealth of knowledge! And so that is the reason if they tell about some planet or mineral to this journal of science, then it'll later on it'll call that Mahatma Ji are this is all plagiarism. They are copying. Mm. So, in fact, many correct hypotheses which were proposed by the own scientific community, by the own men of science, Western science, those hypotheses, though they were correct, still they were rejected by the majority because it did not agree with their preconceptions. Now, this is a very common happening, more common than we think. What? And it applies to us also. Just because something new, it does not conform to our pattern of thought. That is why it gets rejected. In fact, we should have an open mind to consider new ideas and new teachings, and we should do away with our preconceived notions. That is the only way we can hope to learn and to progress. So, this was happening even in that scientific community. Mahatma Ji is saying that many scientists came up with correct hypotheses, but their hypothesis was rejected because it did not agree with the preconceptions of the majority. And Sinnett's intent to know about previous advanced civilizations was really admirable. Mahatma Ji liked it. But any answer given by Mahatma Ji would not be accepted by the Western society as originating from the adepts. It would be attributed to somebody else who would discover these same facts later on. Mahatma Ji gives an example. He says that just in case of Copernicus and Galileo, these are two great scientists we know who came in the 15th and 16th century. And much of their knowledge and discoveries, it was actually based on the manuscripts of Pythagoras. Pythagoras was a mystic and an initiate of the 5th century before Christ. And he knew about so all these things and he taught them in his schools. Okay, but the Western science gives credit about those discoveries, for example, the heliocentric theory, to Galileo and Copernicus. So he says the same will happen, whatever we might tell you about races and sub races, but science will attribute it to somebody else. But now to return to the civilizations, Mahatmaji is asking Sinet, does he know that the Chaldees were at the apex of their occult fame before what you term as the Bronze Age? Okay, so Bronze Age, once more coming back to, okay, there's very less time. I'll take this slide and then we'll stop. The time periods are divided based on evolution of technology. So Bronze Age, you can see, is from 3500 to 1500 BC. Before that, the period is called Stone Age, where man used only stone for implements. In the Bronze Age, he started using metal for tools and other implements. And then came the Iron Age. So Mahatmaji has told Sinet that the Chaldees, that civilization, it was at the apex of their occult fame in the Bronze, even before the Bronze Age. And as per modern history, man was very primitive before the Bronze Age. So before the Bronze Age time, man was very primitive. This is considered by the modern history. But Mahatmaji is telling him that the Chaldees were very advanced in their occult knowledge. Those Chaldees, that sub-race, they lived in the region which was later called Babylon. And in the present day, it is about a few miles, around 50 miles south of Baghdad in Iraq. So Mahatmaji calls them the sons of Ad, or the children of fire mist, for they had great occult knowledge. And these Chaldees, they were the astrologers, the diviners, the savants, or whom in theosophic literature have been called as Magi, the Magi of Babylonia. And what is now called historical period by modern history, it is generally speaking not history but totally fiction, because they have got their facts all wrong. So Mahatmaji is telling Senate that even before the founding of Rome and Athens, which are considered mighty empires, these great civilizations, they have risen and they decayed. And he emphatically states that a series of civilizations existed before as well as after the glacial period. This we just saw glacial period began 100,000 years ago and lasted up to 25,000 years before. So both before the glacial period began and even after that, great empires have risen and decayed. And these civilizations existed upon different places on the globe and at different points in time. They reached their advancement, the apex of their advancement, and they died. But modern writers are not going to accept this because there is no proof from anywhere about it. So thank you all. We will stop here and we will continue the letter in our next session. And now I request Sister Meenakshi ji to give us the translation in Hindi.
नमस्ते, थैंक यू सिस्टर। आज हम लेटर नंबर 93 ए और बी ले रहे हैं। लेटर नंबर 93 ए में सीनेट के क्वेश्चंस है और 93 बी में मास्टर्स के आंसर है। सीनेट का प्रश्न है, आपके आखिरी पत्र में एक बहुत ही रोचक उल्लेख है। जब ह्यूम के बारे में बात करते हुए आप उनके कुछ विशेषताओं के बारे में बात करते हैं जो वे अपने पूर्व जन्म से अपने साथ लाए थे। अभी के जीवित व्यक्तियों के पूर्व जन्मों को देखने और उन्हें पहचानने की क्या आप में शक्ति है? ऐसी स्थिति में मेरी अपनी कुछ विशिष्ट बातों का विवरण मांगना, क्या यह मेरी अनुचित जिज्ञासा होगी? इस पर मास्टर उत्तर देते हैं कि हम सभी अपने पिछले जन्म से कुछ विशेषताएं लेकर आते हैं। यह अटल है। दुर्भाग्य से हम में से कुछ में यह शक्ति है। मैं इसका प्रयोग करना पसंद नहीं करता। मनुष्य स्वयं को जाने, ऐसा कहा गया है। ऐसी डेल्फियन ओरेकल का कथन है। ऐसी जिज्ञासा में निश्चित ही कुछ भी अनुचित नहीं है। हमारे इस वर्तमान जीवन के व्यक्तिमत्व का निर्माता, रचयिता, उसका पूर्व जन्म, उस मनुष्य के बारे में कुछ भी जानने का प्रयास करने से पहले अपने स्वयं के अभी के जीवन को जाने। किसी दिन मैं आपको एक छोटी सी कहानी सुनाऊंगा, ऐसे मास्टर कहते हैं इसके बारे में। आगे का प्रश्न है, क्या अर्वाचीन प्रगति की शुरुआत तक फोर्थ राउंड के लोगों की अपेक्षाकृत मंद स्थिति की तुलना में पिछले 2000 वर्षों के भीतर मानव प्रगति के विलक्षण रफ्तार का हिसाब लगाने का कोई तरीका है? इस पर मास्टर आंसर देते हैं कि एक अत्यंत महत्वपूर्ण साइकिल का उत्तरार्ध है। हर उस ग्रह जहां से मानव जाति गुजरती है, वहां प्रत्येक राउंड, प्रत्येक रिंग के प्रत्येक रेस जैसे अपने बड़े और छोटे साइकिल्स होते हैं। हमारे चौथे राउंड की मानवता की अपनी एक बड़ी साइकिल है, और इसी तरह उसके रेसेस और सब रेसेस की भी साइकिल होती है। विलक्षण रफ्तार, क्यूरियस रश, यह चौथे राउंड के दोहरे प्रभाव के कारण है, यानी उसके अधोगमन की शुरुआत और आपकी सब रेस के छोटे साइकिल का अग्र बिंदु की ओर बढ़ना। याद रखें, आप पांचवी रेस से हैं, फिर भी आप एकमात्र पश्चिमी सब रेस हैं। आपके प्रयासों के बावजूद, जिसे आप सभ्यता कहते हैं, यह केवल पश्चिमी सब रेस और अमेरिका में उसकी उपशाखाओं तक ही सीमित है। गुह्य विद्या के शिक्षार्थी ने चौथे राउंड के लोगों की मंद स्थिति के बारे में बात नहीं करनी चाहिए, क्योंकि इतिहास पश्चिमी देशों को छोड़कर अन्य देशों की आधुनिक काल की प्रगति की शुरुआत तक उस स्थिति के बारे में कुछ नहीं जानता है। उदाहरण के तौर पर, स्पेनियों द्वारा अमेरिका पर आक्रमण होने से पहले आप उस देश के बारे में क्या जानते थे? कॉर्टेज के आगमन से 2 शताब्दी से भी कम समय पहले पेरू और मेक्सिको की सब रेसेस के बीच प्रगति की दिशा में उतनी ही तेजी थी जितनी अब यूरोप और यूएसए में है। उनके द्वारा उत्पन्न कारणों से उनकी सब रेस लगभग विनाश में समाप्त हो गई। इसी तरह साइकिल के अंत में आपकी भी सब रेस खत्म हो जाएगी। हम केवल उन मंद स्थितियों के बारे में ही बात कर सकते हैं जिनमें विकास, वृद्धि, परिपक्वता और क्षय के नियम का पालन करते हुए प्रत्येक रेस और सब रेस अपने परिवर्तन काल के दौरान जाती है। यह बाद वाली स्थिति है जिससे आपकी यूनिवर्सल हिस्ट्री परिचित है, जबकि यह उस स्थिति से पूर्णतः अनभिज्ञ है जिसमें लगभग 10 शताब्दियों पहले भारत भी था। आपकी यूरोपियन सब रेसेस अब अपने अपने साइकिल्स के अग्र बिंदु की ओर बढ़ रही है, और इतिहास कुछ अन्य सब रेसेस के पतन की अवधि से अधिक पीछे नहीं जाता है, जिनमें से अधिकांश पिछली चौथी रेस से संबंधित है। अगला प्रश्न है, क्या पूर्व काल में चौथे राउंड के मनुष्यों का पृथ्वी पर निवास के दौरान बौद्धिक विकास के मामले में हमारे जैसी महान सभ्यताएं थी जो पूर्णतः समाप्त हो गई? इस पर मास्टर आंसर देते हैं कि निस्संदेह ऐसी सभ्यताएं थी। इजिप्शियन और आर्यन रिकॉर्ड्स और विशेषतः हमारी जोडियाकल टेबल्स हमें हमारे आंतरिक ज्ञान के अलावा इसके हर एक प्रमाण से पेश करती है। सभ्यता यानी सिविलाइजेशंस एक विरासत है, एक वंशानुक्रम है, जो साइकिल्स के आरोही और अवरोही पथों के साथ एक रेस से दूसरी रेस में जाते हैं। किसी सब रेस के अल्पसंख्यक होने के दौरान यह उसके पूर्ववर्ती द्वारा उसके लिए संरक्षित किया जाता है, जो अल्पसंख्यक सबरेस के मध्यकाल के पश्चात आमतौर पर लोप हो जाती है, समाप्त हो जाती है। सबसे पहले उनमें से अधिकांश अपनी संपत्ति का अपव्यय करते हैं और उसका कुप्रबंधन करते हैं, या इसे पैतृक खजाने में अछूता छोड़ देते हैं। वे अपने बड़ों की सलाह को तिरस्कार पूर्वक नकारते हैं, अस्वीकार करते हैं, और पढ़ाई करके अतीत में दर्ज उनके लिए संग्रहित अछूती संपत्ति का अधिकतम लाभ उठाने के बजाय बच्चों की तरह सड़कों पर खेलना पसंद करते हैं। इस प्रकार मध्य युग में आपके संक्रमण काल के दौरान यूरोप ने प्राचीन काल के सबूतों को खारिज कर दिया। हेरोडोटस और अन्य विद्वान ग्रीक्स जैसे संतों को झूठ का प्रणेता कहा, जब तक कि यूरोप सुज्ञ नहीं हुआ और इस संज्ञा को इतिहास के जनक में बदला नहीं गया। उपेक्षा करने के बजाय अब आप संग्रह कर रहे हैं और अपने धन में वृद्धि कर रहे हैं। बाकी सभी रेस की तरह आपके रेस की भी उतार चढ़ाव, सम्मान और अवमान का दौर था। आपकी घनघोर मध्यरात्रि थी। अब आप अपने उज्जवल मध्याह्न के समीप आ रहे हैं। पांचवी रेस के फैमिली में से सबसे छोटे आप लंबे समय तक अपने घर में सिंड्रेला की तरह नापसंद और उपेक्षित रहे। और अब जब आपकी अनेकों सब रेसेस मर गई है और अन्य अभी भी मर रही है, जबकि पुराने बचे लोग जो अब अपनी दूसरी शैशवावस्था में है, अपने मसीहा छठी रेस के लिए इंतजार कर रहे हैं, ताकि एक नए जीवन में पुनर्जीवित हो सके और एक नए साइकिल के पथ पर मजबूत होकर नए सिरे से शुरुआत कर सके। अब जबकि पाश्चात्य सिंड्रेला अचानक एक गर्वीली धनी राजकुमारी के रूप में विकसित हो गई है, जिसकी सुंदरता हम सभी देखते हैं और प्रशंसा करते हैं। वह कैसा व्यवहार करती है? कहानी की राजकुमारी की तुलना में वह कम दयालु है। अपनी बड़ी बहन और कम पसंदीदा बहन को थोड़ी शांति के देने के बजाय वह उस पर प्रतिशोध के साथ बदले का नियम लगाती है, जो उसके प्राकृतिक स्वभाव में वृद्धि नहीं करता है। यह कोई रूपक नहीं, परंतु इतिहास है। अगला प्रश्न है, हमारी वर्तमान की चौथे राउंड की पांचवी रेस भी 10 लाख साल पहले एशिया में शुरू हुई थी। 9,98,000 वर्षों में पिछले 2000 साल के पहले यह कैसी थी? उस काल के दौरान क्या हमारी सभ्यताओं से भी बड़ी सभ्यताएं विकसित होकर नष्ट हो चुकी है? इस प्रश्न पर मास्टर कहते हैं कि हाँ, हमारी पांचवी रेस एशिया में 10 लाख साल पहले शुरू हुई थी। इयोसिन युग के पहले भाग में चौथी रेस के महान साइकिल के एटलांटियंस पहले ही अपनी चरम स्थान पर पहुंच गए थे और यह महाद्वीप जिससे आज के सभी महाद्वीप निकले थे, उसमें प्रथम डूबने के लक्षण दिखाई थे। एक ऐसी प्रक्रिया जो 11,446 साल पहले शुरू हुई थी, जब इसका आखिरी द्वीप, जिसे हम पोसिडोनिस कहते हैं, वह डूब गया। लेमुरिया को अटलांटिक महाद्वीप से नहीं जोड़ा जा सकता है। दोनों अपनी विकसित सभ्यताओं और देवताओं के साथ डूब गए। फिर भी इन दोनों विनाशों के बीच लगभग 7 लाख वर्षों की एक छोटी सी अवधि बीत गई। लेमुरिया, चूंकि यह थर्ड रेस की थी, इयोसिन युग के शुरुआती काल से पहले के उस मामूली अंतराल में समृद्ध हो रही थी। लेमुरिया और एटलांटिस की तरह हमारे वर्तमान काल के महाद्वीप पहले भी कई बार जलमग्न हो चुके हैं और उन्हें फिर से प्रकट होने और मानव जाति और सभ्यता के अपने नए समूहों का वहन करने का वक्त मिला है। और पहले बड़े भूगर्भिक उथल-पुथल में, अगले प्रलय में, हर राउंड की शुरुआत से अंत तक होने वाले नियतकालीन प्रलय की श्रृंखला में हमारे पहले से ही विच्छेदित महाद्वीप जलमग्न हो जाएंगे और लेमुरिया और एटलांटिस जैसे द्वीप उभर कर आएंगे। निस्संदेह फोर्थ रेस का अपना उच्चतम सभ्यता का काल था। ग्रीक, रोमन, यहाँ तक कि इजिप्शियन सभ्यता थर्ड रेस से शुरू हुई सभ्यताओं की तुलना में कुछ भी नहीं है। सेकंड रेस वाले जंगली नहीं थे, परंतु उन्हें सभ्य नहीं कहा जा सकता। ग्रीक और रोमन छोटी सब रेसेस थी और इजिप्शियंस हमारे कॉकेशियंस का अहम हिस्सा थी। उच्चतर सभ्यता तक पहुंचकर दोनों नीचे चले गए। एक विशिष्ट सबरेस के रूप में इजिप्ट पूरी तरह से गायब हो गई। भारत अपने मूल रेस की पहली और सबसे शक्तिशाली उपशाखाओं में से एक के रूप में और कई सब रेसेस से बनी है, वह इस समय तक कायम है और किसी दिन इतिहास में अपना स्थान लेने के लिए संघर्ष कर रही है। इतिहास लगभग 12,000 साल पहले के इजिप्ट की कुछ धुंधली झलकियां पाता है, जब हजारों साल पहले ही अपने साइकिल के चरम बिंदु पर पहुंचने के बाद अधोगमन शुरू किया था। वह 5,000 साल पहले के भारत के बारे में या चाल्डीज के बारे में क्या जानता है, जिसे आप कांस्य युग कहते हैं? उससे पहले चाल्डियंस अपनी गुह्य विद्या की प्रसिद्धि में चोटी के स्थान पर थे। क्या आप यह जानते हैं? सन ऑफ एडी या चिल्ड्रन ऑफ द फायर मिस्ट सैकड़ों शताब्दियों पहले लोह युग से पहले आए थे, जो कि प्राचीन युग था, जिसे अब आप ऐतिहासिक काल कहते हैं। उसकी शायद ही शुरुआत हुई थी। हम इस बात की पुष्टि करते हैं कि सभ्यताओं की श्रृंखला ग्लेशियल पीरियड के पहले और बाद में भी अस्तित्व में थी। वे ग्लोब के विभिन्न स्थानों पर थी, अपनी महिमा के चरम पर पहुंची और समाप्त होगी। थैंक यू। नमस्ते।
Thank you, Meenakshi ji, for completing this translation in such a short time. And I think today we overshot our time a little bit. But if anybody has a question, we can take it now.
Ma'am, what is Lemuria means Negroes? Is referring to Negroes? Lemuria, you use the word Lemuria.
Lemuria is the third root race. So it is not Negroes. But see, we are in the fifth root race. We are the Aryan root race. Before that, the fourth root race, which was called Atlantean. And before that was the third root race, which is the Lemurian root race.
Okay.
Okay.
And
So
our
all
past deeds, misdeeds or deeds, or good deeds or misdeeds, will continue to again in this birth, then again in the next birth. Does it continue?
So Mahatma Ji has mentioned that there is this law of cycles, and it applies to every race and sub-race, that they will develop, they will grow, they will reach their peak or their apex, and then they will decline. So it happens for all the races and also the sub-races. So it is like cycles within the cycles. It happened for Lemuria, it happened for Atlanteans, and now it will also happen for Aryans. It is true for all.
Thank you.
I would recommend all participants read the book, The Beginnings of the Sixth Root Race. It's not beginning, it is beginnings of the sixth root race. Lots and lots of questions will be cleared.
Right. That is a book by C.W. Leadbeater. Thank you, Kailash ji, for that input. Any other question? Pradeep ji, you wanted to mention some things about that book, Ageless Wisdom by Joy Mills.
That is written by commentary just given by Joy Mills. On the section 1, she better clarifies that what she mentioned, if as Cage goes on to say, it is more proper to study our present personality. Here in this book, original book, she mentioned to study our present personality before attempting to learn anything of its creator, predecessor, fashioner, the man that was, something like this. But this Joy Mills, she mentioned, it is more proper to study our present personality before attempting to learn anything of its creator. Then she added, we can ask ourselves, if we are looking
as objectively as possible. Means in a mirror, if you are standing before mirror, so you will watch your face, your body movement, your many things you can observe objectively. So see here, sir, we are looking as objectively as possible at our present natural inclination. Natural inclination, habits, uh, of thoughts, actions in an effort to understand ourselves. So three things. Uh, this is everywhere, whether Socrates or Upanishad or in Mahatma, different even today or yesterday, that Delhi meditation Mahatma letter means that you know yourself first. Here, if we objectively look at ourselves, what we should look, our natural inclination, but automatically we will come forward to speak something, some opinion we will give, like this. It is our natural inclination. Then habits of thoughts, always are thinking of others, many things that we have to observe. Action in an effort to understand ourselves as we are now, and from that understanding to determine what may need changing. So if we understand ourselves, our thought, inclination, action, then we will determine what may need change. That Joy Mills added in this part. Then about this picture aspect, dustbin or something, she mentioned. But in the uh, uh, she mentioned there are 29 questions, and she divided into three parts. Question 1 to 6 concerning human evolution, races and their civilization, including a query on the origin of evil. Then question 7 to 14 relating to physical science.
Yes.
And question 15 to through 29 about the evolution after death, states in general, and process of reincarnation. In this way, she divided. Regarding other aspect, let us keep it for next Sunday. What is new she added?
Right. Right. Thank you, sir. That book will be very valuable to, because there are many questions in this
Yes,
letter,
yes.
and we can have a different perspective. So thank you all for joining today. We'll close the session now.
Yes.
Close with the closing prayer. Om Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya. Om सर्वेषां स्वस्तिर्भवतु सर्वेषां शान्तिर्भवतु सर्वेषां मङ्गलं भवतु सर्वेषां पूर्णं भवतु लोकाः समस्ताः सुखिनो भवन्तु सर्वे भवन्तु सुखिनः सर्वे सन्तु निरामयाः सर्वे भद्राणि पश्यन्तु मा कश्चित् दुःखभाग् भवेत् ॐ शान्ति शान्ति Namaste. Thank you all for joining.
Tomorrow we have a Adair Day online program, and you will be there hosting as well as moderating. We have Narendra Vaisha from Kenya will deliver keynote address.
So all are requested to join tomorrow's program, celebration of Adiyar Day. Same time, evening 6 o'clock. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.